Hi there. Welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're going to slip into the shadows of World War II, where you'll discover how America built its very first spy school from scratch. Picture yourself standing outside a grand Manhattan mansion on a crisp autumn evening in 1941, watching mysterious figures hurry through an unmarked door. The lights are dimmed, the curtains drawn tight, and inside, something unprecedented is taking shape. Now, I should probably mention that if you'd actually tried to sneak into this building back then, you definitely wouldn't have survived the experience. Those guards weren't messing around. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment, letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these bedtime stories travel. All right, let's begin the story. You push through the heavy oak door at 2430 E Street in Washington, D.C., and immediately you sense this isn't your typical government building. The marble floors echo with urgent footsteps. Typewriters clatter behind closed doors, and somewhere down the hall, you hear what sounds suspiciously like, is that someone practicing lockpicking? This mansion, which once hosted elegant dinner parties, has become the nerve center of America's most audacious experiment, creating a spy agency from absolutely nothing. The year is 1941, and while Europe burns, America remains stubbornly neutral. But here in this commandeered building, you're witnessing the birth of what will become the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. Unlike Britain's centuries-old intelligence traditions or Soviet Russia's deeply embedded spy networks, America is starting from zero. No spy schools, no trained operatives, no institutional knowledge, just a wild idea and a mansion full of misfits about to change history. You follow the scent of cigarette smoke up a grand staircase, past oil paintings of long-dead aristocrats who'd probably spin in their graves if they knew what their former home had become. In what used to be the ballroom, you find maps covering every wall, Europe, Asia, Africa, all marked with colored pins and cryptic notations. A Harvard professor argues with a Wall Street lawyer about the best way to forge German documents, while in the corner, someone who looks suspiciously like a professional safecracker demonstrates his craft to a group of eager students. The mansion's previous owner, a wealthy widow, had donated it to the government for the war effort, though she probably imagined it housing diplomatic meetings, not teaching people how to blow up bridges. Historians still argue whether she knew exactly what her donation would enable, but either way, her Gatsby-esque parties had been replaced by something far more intriguing. You notice how everyone here moves with purpose, despite the chaos. There's no precedent for what they're attempting, turning America from an intelligence backwater into a major player in the shadow war. The FBI handles domestic issues, sure, but foreign intelligence? That's virgin territory. Some military intelligence exists, but it's scattered, uncoordinated, and frankly, pretty terrible. Just months ago, America's idea of foreign intelligence was having military attachés attend cocktail parties and report back on gossip. But now, in this mansion, something electric fills the air. You can feel it, the urgency, the improvisation, the sense that they're making up the rules as they go. A woman rushes past carrying a stack of files marked confidential in red ink so fresh it's still wet. Through an open door, you glimpse what appears to be a chemistry lab where someone's mixing. Well, you probably don't want to know what they're mixing. The mainstream history books will tell you America entered the intelligence game late. But what they often miss is just how insanely ambitious this whole project was. Imagine trying to build NASA from scratch in under a year. Except instead of rockets, you're building human weapons. And speaking of weapons, you notice a disturbing number of people here seem to be carrying concealed pistols, poorly hidden under their suit jackets. Apparently, the first rule of spy school is that everyone needs to be armed at all times, even during lunch. You hear him before you see him, a booming laugh that cuts through the mansion's controlled chaos like a foghorn through mist. Following the sound up another flight of stairs, you find yourself face to face with the man who dreamed up this whole impossible scheme, William Joseph Donovan. Though everyone calls him Wild Bill, he's shorter than you expected, maybe 5'9", but he fills the room like smoke from a bonfire. His blue eyes have this unsettling quality. They're laughing at a joke while simultaneously calculating how many seconds it would take to kill everyone in the room. Wild Bill's office looks like a hurricane hit a library. Maps spill off tables, coded messages pile up on chairs, and there's what appears to be a Japanese sword propped casually against a filing cabinet. He's simultaneously dictating a memo to a harried secretary, studying aerial photographs of somewhere that looks suspiciously like Berlin, and somehow also eating a sandwich. This is multitasking before multitasking was cool. The man's energy could power a small city, which is good because his idea requires roughly that much juice to pull off. You settle into a worn leather chair, probably worth more than your annual salary, and watch Donovan work. Here's a guy who won the Medal of Honor in World War I, made millions as a Wall Street lawyer, and now wants to build America's first centralized intelligence agency. Not because anyone asked him to, mind you. He just decided America needed one and bulldozed his way into making it happen. The Pentagon thinks he's crazy. The FBI's Jay. Edgar Hoover absolutely despises him, which, let's be honest, is probably a point in Donovan's favor. Even President Roosevelt, who actually likes Wild Bill, occasionally wonders if he's given too much power to this maniac with a law degree. The plan Donovan's sketching out on a cocktail napkin, because of course he is, would make any reasonable person laugh. He wants to take regular Americans, lawyers, professors, actors, athletes, and turn them into spies capable of operating behind enemy lines. No military experience required. In fact, he actively prefers civilians because, as he puts it, while gesturing with his sandwich, military men think military thoughts. I need people who think sideways. You're pretty sure that's not a real expression, but when Wild Bill says it, it somehow makes perfect sense. Here's the thing historians still argue about. Was Donovan a visionary or just incredibly lucky? Because his idea of spy training sounds absolutely bonkers. He wants to teach suburban housewives how to code messages in their knitting patterns. He plans to train Wall Street bankers in hand-to-hand combat. He's actively recruiting safecrackers from federal prisons, promising them pardons if they'll teach their skills to Ivy League kids. This isn't a plan. It's fever dream with a budget. But somehow, and this is the part that makes you wonder if Wild Bill might actually be onto something, people are buying it. Smart people, connected people, people who have everything to lose and nothing to gain from playing spy games. You watch a Supreme Court justice's son walk past, deep in conversation with what you're pretty sure is a reformed mob lawyer. In any other context, this would be a punchline. Here, it's Tuesday. Donovan's phone rings constantly. He answers every third call, seemingly at random. Send them all, he barks into the receiver. Yes, even the one with the wooden leg, especially him. Nobody suspects a cripple. He hangs up and turns to you with a grin that would make a shark nervous. This is his secret weapon. Absolute, unshakable confidence that his insane plan will work. It's infectious. You've been in his presence for 10 minutes, and already you're half convinced that training librarians to be assassins makes perfect sense. The quirky tidbit nobody talks about? Donovan kept a fortune teller on payroll. Not officially, of course, but there was definitely a Hungarian woman who read tarot cards in the basement. And more than one major operation got green-lit based on her insights. Whether Donovan actually believed in the supernatural or just enjoyed the psychological effect of having a mystic on staff remains one of those delicious historical mysteries. You're witnessing the birth of American intelligence culture, and it's nothing like the British model of gentlemen spies or the Soviet system of ideological warriors. This is pure American improvisation, part Hollywood, part Wall Street, part Wild West. Donovan's creating something that shouldn't work, using methods that shouldn't make sense, with people who shouldn't be here. And yet, as you watch another unlikely recruit get swept into Wild Bill's orbit, you realize that's exactly why it might succeed. You're handed a clipboard by a woman who looks like she stepped out of a Fifth Avenue boutique, except for the pistol barely concealed under her Chanel jacket. Recruitment office is down the hall. Third door on the left, she says, eyeing you like she's already calculating whether you'd make a better saboteur or analyst. Following her directions, you find yourself in what used to be the mansion's music room, now transformed into the strangest hiring hall in American history. The recruitment process for America's first spy school makes about as much sense as teaching fish to climb trees, which is to say, it's working brilliantly despite all logic. Behind a mahogany desk sits a chain-smoking psychology professor from Harvard who's apparently developed a test to identify ideal spy candidates. His questions range from, "Can you lie without sweating?" to, "How do you feel about jumping out of airplanes?" The correct answer to both, you quickly learn, is enthusiastic agreement. You watch a parade of America's most unlikely spy candidates flow through this room. There's the Yale rowing team captain who speaks fluent German because his girlfriend was from Berlin. A Hollywood stunt performer demonstrates how he can fall downstairs without breaking anything important. A professional forger, recently released from Sing Sing prison, critiques the fake documents scattered across the desk with the air of an art critic at the Louvre. "This letterhead is amateur hour," he mutters, and somehow lands himself a teaching position on the spot. The OSS recruiters have thrown out every conventional hiring practice. Military experience? Optional. Criminal record? Potentially beneficial. Speaks multiple languages? Great. But they'll take a skilled locksmith who only knows English over a multilingual professor who faints at the sight of blood. They're looking for what they call ungentlemanly warriors, people willing to fight dirty, think creatively, and break every rule in the book. Preferably people who've already broken a few rules and gotten away with it. Here's where it gets genuinely weird. They're actively recruiting from mental institutions. Not the patients, usually, but the doctors and staff who understand how the human mind cracks under pressure. One psychiatrist you meet specialized in treating stage magicians and con artists before the war. Now he's teaching future spies how to maintain false identities without going insane. His main qualification? He once talked his way out of a Turkish prison, using nothing but playing cards and terrible magic tricks. You flip through a recruitment pamphlet that would never make it past modern HR. "Are you bored with your current life?" it asks. "Do you have specialized skills that might be considered legally questionable? Can you keep a secret even if someone pulls out your fingernails?" It's like a job posting written by someone who learned about employment law from pulp novels. Yet Harvard professors are lining up next to circus performers, each convinced they have what it takes to be America's next super spy. The demographics alone would make a statistician weep. You've got Connecticut blue bloods training alongside jazz musicians from Harlem. Former bootleggers share expertise with federal judges' daughters. A surprising number of missionaries make the cut. Turns out years of living in remote locations and learning obscure languages while avoiding local authorities is excellent spy preparation. Who knew? What historians still argue about is whether this scattershot approach was genius or just desperation dressed up as strategy. The British, with their centuries of imperial intrigue, recruited from the same handful of universities and clubs. The Soviets built their agents from childhood through rigid ideological training. Americans, they put up what amounted to a "Help Wanted Spies" sign and took whoever showed up, assuming they could pass the psychological evaluation and demonstrate at least one useful skill, legal or otherwise. The woman who recruited you returns, this time carrying a stack of applications that would make fascinating reading if they weren't stamped "Burn after reading" in red ink. She pauses at one form, raises an eyebrow, and shows it to the Harvard professor. This one claims he can crack any safe in under 3 minutes and speaks fluent Japanese because he grew up in a traveling circus that toured Asia. The professor doesn't even look up from his cigarette. Send him to advanced training immediately. You realize you're watching America invent its intelligence culture in real time, making it up as they go along. There's no precedent for this kind of recruitment, no manual for identifying potential spies from a population that, until very recently, thought espionage was something that happened in movies. Yet somehow, this mansion full of misfits, criminals, academics, and adventurers is about to become the most effective intelligence network of the war. It shouldn't work. By all logic, it can't work. But then again, logic was thrown out the window the moment Wild Bill Donovan decided America needed spies. You're bundled into the back of an unmarked truck at 3 a.m, December air biting through your wool coat like frozen needles. The other recruits pressed against you smell of cigarettes, nervous sweat, and what might be bootleg whiskey someone smuggled aboard. After hours of driving north, past sleeping American towns and into the Canadian wilderness, you finally arrive at what looks like a logging camp designed by someone with a sadistic sense of humor. Welcome to Camp X, officially known as STS-103. Unofficially known as the place where nice Americans learn to kill people with their bare hands. The British are running this show, and they have absolutely zero patience for American squeamishness. Your instructor, a compact Scotsman with scars on his scars, introduces himself by throwing a knife that lands precisely 1 inch from your left ear. That, he says in an accent thick as porridge, was me being friendly. Tomorrow we start the unfriendly lessons. The British have been playing this game since before America was a country, and they're about to compress centuries of dirty tricks into a 6-week crash course. Camp X sits on the shores of Lake Ontario, strategically positioned between Toronto and the U.S. border, hidden behind screens of evergreen trees and official denial. The Canadians pretend it doesn't exist. The Americans pretend they're not sending their best and brightest here to learn how to garrote sentries. The British pretend they're not secretly enjoying every minute of teaching their former colonists the family business. It's like summer camp. If summer camp included a curriculum on silent killing theory and practice, you're assigned to Barrack 7, a drafty wooden structure that would violate every building code in existence if building codes applied to secret assassination schools. Your bunkmate is a philosophy professor from Princeton who spends his first night muttering Nietzsche quotes while practicing knife throws into the wall. Above him sleeps a former minor league baseball player who's unnervingly good at memorizing the exact position of everyone's jugular vein. Below you, a librarian from Detroit methodically oils a disassembled pistol she's somehow already acquired. This is your new normal. The training schedule reads like a psychopath's wish list. Monday, Introduction to Explosives, how to blow up infrastructure without dying. Tuesday, Unarmed Combat. Your hands are weapons. Your weapons are extensions of your hands. Wednesday, Codes and Ciphers. Making the Enigma machine your bitch. Actual quote from the British instructor. Thursday, Psychological Warfare. Breaking minds without breaking Geneva Conventions. Friday, Fieldcraft. How to live off the land when the land wants you dead. Saturdays are for advanced lockpicking. Sundays you practice lying during mock interrogations. Here's the detail that doesn't make it into official histories. The British instructors are all actively serving commandos who've been pulled from actual combat operations to teach. That pleasant middle-aged man teaching you 17 ways to kill with a newspaper. He did 4 of them last month in occupied France. The grandmother-looking woman demonstrating poisons. She's personally responsible for more Nazi deaths than most bomber crews. These aren't theoreticians. They're practitioners sharing trade secrets like master craftsmen training apprentices. You discover muscles you didn't know existed, mostly because they're screaming in protest. The hand-to-hand combat instructor, a former Shanghai policeman who learned his trade keeping order in the most dangerous port in Asia, believes in learning through pain. If it doesn't hurt, he explains while demonstrating a chokehold that definitely hurts. You're not paying attention. By week 2, you can dislocate someone's shoulder in 3 different ways and reset it in 2. This seems like information you probably shouldn't have. But here we are. The camp's commanding officer, a British colonel who lost an eye in the previous war and seems determined to make everyone else lose something in this one, gives weekly lectures on what he calls ungentlemanly warfare. These talks would be hilarious if they weren't so terrifying. The Germans expect you to fight fair, he explains, gesturing with a pointer that's definitely been sharpened into a weapon. This expectation is their weakness. Exploit it ruthlessly. He then demonstrates 6 ways to turn common household items into lethal weapons. You'll never look at a pencil the same way again. Historians still argue whether Camp X was necessary or just the British way of hazing their American cousins. What's indisputable is that this frozen corner of Canada became the unlikeliest finishing school in history. Where else could a sociology professor learn to build bombs next to a jazz musician mastering Morse code, while a reformed burglar teaches both of them how to crack German safes? It's democracy in action, assuming democracy involves a lot of controlled explosions and practice assassinations. You're back in Maryland now, teeth still chattering from those Canadian nights, standing outside what looks like a perfectly respectable country club. The Congressional Country Club, to be exact, which the government has commandeered and transformed into a finishing school for spies. If Camp X was where you learn to kill, this is where you learn to steal, lie, and forge your way across occupied Europe. The golf course has been converted into an obstacle course. The 19th hole now serves explosive cocktails, literally, and the pro shop stocks lockpicks instead of golf tees. Your new instructor is a reformed second-story man from Chicago who insists everyone call him professor, despite having dropped out of school at age 12. He's teaching a class of Harvard lawyers how to pick locks, and the cognitive dissonance is delicious. Feel the pins, he croons, caressing a padlock like a lover. Each one wants to tell you its secrets. You just got to know how to listen. A future Supreme Court clerk takes notes with the intensity of someone preparing for the bar exam. The forgery department occupies what used to be the club's ballroom, now filled with printing presses, cameras, and enough blank documents to create entirely new identities for half of Europe. The man running this operation is an artist who used to forge Rembrandts before discovering government work paid better and involved less prison time. He's teaching your class how to age paper using coffee, urine, and other substances you'd rather not think about. The Nazis are very particular about their paperwork, he explains, demonstrating how to replicate the exact shade of purple ink used by the Vichy French prefecture. One wrong watermark and you're dead, no pressure. Meanwhile, in the basement, a different kind of education is taking place. A professional actor from the Mercury Theatre, yes, Orson Welles' company, is teaching the art of maintaining cover identities. Method acting isn't just for the stage, he declares, forcing a mild-mannered accountant to spend 3 days pretending to be a Portuguese fisherman. The accountant must speak only broken English, eat nothing but sardines, and complain constantly about net prices. By day 3, even his wife wouldn't recognize him. That's the point. You spend mornings learning what they euphemistically call surreptitious entry, which is spy speak for breaking and entering. The facilities include a replica European town, complete with different lock types from every occupied country. German locks, you learn, are over-engineered and easier to pick than they should be. French locks are artistic but impractical. Italian locks are surprisingly good, which makes sense when you remember Italy invented the Renaissance and, apparently, decent security. The afternoon brings classes in what can only be described as applied lying. A psychology professor who spent the 1930s studying con artists teaches behavioral deception indicators. Essentially, how to lie without your body betraying you. No touching your nose, no averting eye contact, no unconscious throat clearing. The best lies, he insists, are mostly truth with just enough fiction to matter. You practice by playing poker with marked cards, learning to bluff even when you know everyone else is cheating too. Here's the bizarre detail historians still argue about. The OSS hired actual criminals as instructors, but insisted on giving them fake academic titles. So you have Professor Safecracker, Dr. Forger, and Dean Pickpocket. There's even a provost whose pre-war career involved running confidence games on wealthy widows. The administration apparently believed that academic titles would provide respectability to lessons on how to violate most federal laws. The code-breaking section occupies the country club's former wine cellar, which seems appropriate given how drunk you'd need to be to think some of these encryption methods make sense. A mathematician who looks about 12 years old is explaining something called a one-time pad, while chain-smoking unfiltered Camels. Unbreakable if used correctly, she says. Ashing directly onto a priceless Persian rug. Of course, nobody ever uses them correctly, which is why I have job security. Physical training continues because apparently knowing how to forge documents isn't useful if you can't run away after using them. The obstacle course incorporates lockpicking challenges. Imagine American Ninja Warrior, but with more felonies. You might need to pick 3 locks while being chased by instructors pretending to be Gestapo agents. They're very committed to their roles. One actually learned German insults specifically for these exercises. By week 3 at the country club, you can forge a German travel permit, pick most commercial locks, maintain a false identity under interrogation, and encode messages in seemingly innocent letters home. You've also developed a healthy paranoia about everyone and everything. That elderly woman feeding pigeons, probably a Soviet agent. The mailman, definitely reporting to someone. This might be clinical paranoia, but in the intelligence business, paranoia is just another word for paying attention. You descend into what used to be the country club's wine cellar, now converted into the OSS's psychological warfare laboratory. The vintage Bordeaux has been replaced by printing presses, radio equipment, and filing cabinets stuffed with the most creative lies ever told in wartime. Welcome to Morale Operations, or MO as everyone calls it, where America learns to weaponize bullshit with scientific precision. Your instructor this morning is a former Madison Avenue advertising executive who pivoted from selling soap to selling despair to Nazis. He's explaining his masterwork, a fake German newspaper called Das Neue Deutschland, printed on authentic German paper stock, using German typefaces, filled with stories designed to make Wehrmacht soldiers question everything. We're not just lying, he clarifies, adjusting his horn-rimmed glasses. We're creating an alternative reality where Germany is losing faster than it actually is. It's like advertising, but with more corpses. The forgers you met last week have been busy. They're producing fake ration cards showing severe food shortages, counterfeit letters from German soldiers describing horrific conditions, and fraudulent Nazi party documents suggesting corruption at the highest levels. One particularly inspired creation is a supposed transcript of Hitler's doctor discussing the Führer's deteriorating mental state. It's fiction, but it's the kind of fiction that sounds just plausible enough to spread through the German ranks like wildfire. In the radio room, a team of German-speaking Americans broadcasts a program called Soldatensender Calais, pretending to be a German forces station. Between playing the latest German hits and soccer scores, they slip in demoralizing news. Units surrendering en masse. Officers hoarding supplies while enlisted men starve. Wonder weapons that don't work. The DJ, a former Cleveland radio personality whose grandparents were from Bavaria, has perfected the patter of a tired Wehrmacht broadcaster. And now, Lily Marlene, while we wonder if we'll live to see another Christmas. The MO team includes some genuinely disturbing individuals who found their calling in psychological destruction. There's the psychiatrist who specializes in identifying cultural pressure points. What specific fears keep German soldiers awake at night? The anthropologist who studied Germanic folklore to create superstitions that would spread through units like viruses. The former tabloid journalist who writes fake astrological predictions suggesting terrible fates for those born under Hitler's sign. It's warfare filtered through a funhouse mirror. You're assigned to a team creating what they call black propaganda, materials that appear to come from within Germany itself. Your current project is a series of fake Nazi party documents suggesting that high-ranking officials are secretly negotiating surrender terms with the Allies. The forger teaching your class spent 3 hours explaining the precise way Nazi bureaucrats stapled documents at a 15-degree angle, exactly 1 centimeter from the top left corner. This level of detail seems insane until you remember that one wrong staple could blow an entire operation. Here's the weird historical tidbit nobody talks about. The MO division employed Hollywood special effects artists to create fake wounds and casualties for propaganda photos. They'd stage elaborate scenes of supposed German atrocities against their own troops, photograph them, then distribute the images through resistance networks. One artist, who'd previously worked on Universal monster movies, proudly showed off his ability to create realistic bullet wounds using gelatin and corn syrup. It's just like making Frankenstein, he explained. Except Frankenstein was trying to create life, and we're trying to create doubt. The black radio operations get even stranger. There's a station called Deutscher Kurzwellensender Atlantic that broadcasts music programs interrupted by increasingly panicked emergency bulletins about Allied advances. The broadcasters, all native German speakers who fled the Nazi regime, deliver these fake news flashes with Oscar-worthy performances. During one broadcast, the station is supposedly overrun by Allied forces mid-program. You can hear gunfire, screaming, and then dead air. It's completely staged, recorded in a Maryland basement, but German U-boat crews reportedly found it thoroughly convincing. Historians still argue whether these operations actually demoralized German forces or just provided employment for creative sociopaths. What's undeniable is that America threw itself into the propaganda game with characteristic excess. Where the British preferred subtle whisper campaigns, Americans created entire parallel universes of disinformation. It's the difference between poisoning a well and poisoning the entire water table. The crown jewel of MO operations is something called the Muzak Project, fake Allied casualty lists inflated by 300% and distributed through captured German communication channels. The idea is to make German commanders think they're inflicting more damage than they actually are, encouraging them to maintain failing strategies. It's jujitsu applied to information warfare, using the enemy's success against them. The professor explaining this concept looks disturbingly pleased with himself. "We're not lying about their victories," he insists. "We're just helping them count creatively." You're standing in a refrigerated warehouse in Maryland, teeth chattering not from cold, but from pure adrenaline, as a British commando explains how you're going to parachute into Nazi-occupied France with exactly 2 other people and somehow not die immediately. This is Jedburgh training, named after the Scottish town where the concept was born, though you're pretty sure the original Jedburgh never involved jumping out of perfectly good airplanes into territories where everyone wants to kill you. The Jedburgh concept is elegantly insane. 3-person teams consisting of an American officer, a British officer, and a French resistance fighter drop behind enemy lines to coordinate guerrilla warfare. It's like a joke that starts, an American, a Brit, and a Frenchman jump out of a plane. Except the punchline involves high explosives and the very real possibility of torture if captured. Your team includes a British demolitions expert who collects butterflies and quotes Wordsworth while assembling bombs, and a French communist who trusts no one but makes excellent coffee under field conditions. Physical training reaches new levels of sadism. You run 10 miles before breakfast, but not just running while carrying a 50-pound radio set and being chased by instructors pretending to be German patrols. They have motorcycles. You have blistered feet and a growing appreciation for why gazelles evolved to be fast. The swimming requirements alone would qualify you for the Olympics. If the Olympics included a category for crossing a freezing river at night while carrying explosives. The parachute training happens at what everyone calls the farm, though it looks more like a medieval torture facility with modern equipment. Your instructor, a RAF pilot who survived being shot down twice, has strong opinions about parachute deployment. The silk will open, he assures you. Probably, usually, most of the time. This is not as reassuring as he seems to think. You practice landing rolls until your body is one continuous bruise, learning to hit the ground, roll, and immediately bury your parachute before German patrols spot it. But jumping is the easy part. The hard part is what comes after. Surviving in occupied territory while coordinating resistance operations. You learn to navigate by stars, memorize every railway junction in France, and identify German military vehicles by their engine sounds. A former hunting guide from Montana teaches woodland survival. though he admits tracking deer in Wyoming didn't quite prepare him for evading Waffen SS units with dogs. Same principle, he insists, except the deer weren't trying to interrogate you. The psychological preparation is intense. A psychiatrist who studied mass hysteria explains how to maintain morale in resistance groups while being hunted. You're not just military advisors, he says. Chain smoking as usual. You're therapists, cheerleaders, and occasionally executioners when someone cracks. The French communist nods approvingly at this last part. He's already survived 2 years in the resistance and has opinions about dealing with informers that would make the Geneva Convention weep. Here's the detail historians still argue about. Jedburgh teams were specifically trained to be expendable. The life expectancy for a team after insertion was 6 weeks. Not 6 weeks until extraction, 6 weeks until death or capture. The OSS planners figured this was enough time to cause significant disruption before the Germans hunted them down. They shared this calculation with the volunteers, who apparently decided that 6 weeks of meaningful action beat years of safe irrelevance. There's a certain terrifying mathematics to this decision. Weapons training focuses on everything you might find in occupied France, from stolen German rifles to homemade explosives. The British butterfly collector turns out to be an artist with plastique, sculpting charges that can drop a bridge with minimal explosive. It's all about understanding structural weakness, he explains, demonstrating on a scale model. Like poetry, really, finding the point where everything breaks. You're not sure comparing demolition to Wordsworth is normal, but nothing about Jedburgh training qualifies as normal. The teams develop their own cultures. Some groups bond over shared hatred of the training. Others compete to see who can be most reckless and survive. Your team bonds over increasingly creative ways to prepare MREs and a running competition to identify birds by their calls, which seems surreal until you realize identifying sounds at distance might save your life. The Frenchman teaches you to curse in 7 dialects of French, arguing this is essential cultural knowledge. The Brit responds by teaching Welsh profanity, which sounds like someone choking on consonants. By week 8, you can parachute into darkness, live off the land indefinitely, coordinate complex military operations in 3 languages, and build a radio from spare parts. You've also developed the 1,000-yard stare common to people who've accepted their own probable deaths. The final exercise involves a mock mission, where you're hunted through the Maryland countryside by troops pretending to be Germans. They're very enthusiastic about their roles. One actually learned to speak French with a German accent, just for authenticity. This attention to detail would be admirable if it weren't so terrifying. You find yourself in a different world entirely now, one that smells of Chanel No. 5 and gunpowder. The OSS has taken over a former finishing school in Virginia, where young ladies once learned proper table settings and now learn 17 ways to conceal a cyanide pill. The contrast is delicious. Doilies on tables where bomb components are assembled, tea services used to practice poisoning techniques, and etiquette lessons that include how to smile while sliding a knife between someone's ribs. The women here defy every stereotype about 1940s femininity. There's the debutante from Baltimore who turns out to have a gift for cryptography, encoding messages faster than the machines designed to read them. The librarian from Minneapolis who memorizes Nazi railroad timetables like other people memorize phone numbers. The nurse from Texas who can assemble a radio transmitter blindfolded and whose bedside manner extends to interrogating wounded prisoners. These aren't damsels waiting for rescue. They're the ones doing the rescuing, assuming they don't kill you first. Your instructor this morning is a former British intelligence officer who goes by Miss Christie, definitely not her real name, and teaches a class called Social Infiltration, essentially how to use sexism as a weapon. Gentlemen expect ladies to be decorative and stupid, she explains, demonstrating how to hide microfilm in a compact mirror. This expectation will get them killed. She's not being metaphorical. Last month, one of her students strangled a double agent with her own silk stockings. The stockings were French, pre-war quality. The double agent was buried in an unmarked grave. Miss Christie seems prouder of the stockings' durability than the successful mission. The curriculum reads like a mashup of finishing school and assassination academy. Morning classes might cover codes and ciphers, hiding messages in love letters, followed by poisons, kitchen chemistry for field operations. Afternoon brings radio operations, maintaining communication under fire, and close combat, when ladylike behavior fails. There's even a course on makeup, specifically how to use it to create disguises, hide cyanide capsules, and temporarily blind an attacker with properly weaponized face powder. The women training here aren't just learning to be spies. They're learning to be specific kinds of spies. Some train for missions in occupied France, where they'll pose as everything from governesses to black market dealers. Others prepare for the Pacific Theater, learning Japanese customs and how to operate in jungle conditions while wearing a sarong. One group studies Norwegian, preparing to ski into Nazi-occupied territory. Watching a Southern belle execute perfect telemark turns while assembling a rifle is something you won't forget. Here's the historical detail that makes modern historians uncomfortable. The OSS actively recruited women specifically because enemies would underestimate them. The training materials, recently declassified, explicitly state that feminine agents can access areas and information unavailable to male operatives. They're talking about using sexuality as intelligence-gathering tool, though the official documents dance around this with euphemisms that would make a Victorian blush. The women themselves are considerably less delicate about it. If batting my eyelashes gets me Nazi battle plans, one trainee puts it, I'll bat them until they fall off. The technical training is identical to what men receive, with some additions, lockpicking, but focused on jewelry boxes and vanity cases where documents might be hidden. Explosives training, but emphasizing bombs that can be concealed in typically feminine items. One afternoon, you watch a demolitions expert teach a group how to hide plastique in a girdle. The Germans won't search there, he explains. Clearly uncomfortable with the entire discussion. The women find his discomfort hilarious and spend the rest of the class suggesting increasingly creative hiding spots. Virginia Hall deserves her own paragraph. She's already a legend, the one-legged spy who escaped France ahead of the Gestapo, known to the Germans as the most dangerous Allied agent. She's here teaching evasion techniques, and her wooden leg, which she calls Cuthbert, doesn't slow her down. Watching her outrun trained Marines during escape exercises while providing running commentary on their tactical errors is both inspiring and humiliating. The Nazis couldn't catch me, she observes, and I'm literally missing parts. The psychological preparation is intense. These women know they'll face specific tortures if captured, things the Geneva Convention pretends don't happen. A female psychiatrist who survived the Spanish Civil War teaches mental resistance techniques specifically tailored to what female agents might endure. It's brutal, honest, and absolutely necessary. The students take notes with the same focused attention they once might have given to wedding planning. Historians still argue whether the OSS's use of female agents was progressive or exploitative. What's undeniable is that these women were volunteers who understood exactly what they were signing up for. They're not victims of patriarchy. They're using patriarchy's blind spots to win a war. Watching them train with a cheerful ruthlessness that would terrify most combat veterans, you realize they're not breaking gender barriers so much as weaponizing them. You push through an unmarked door into what looks like Q's workshop from a James Bond film. Except it's 1943 and James Bond hasn't been invented yet. This is the OSS Research and Development Branch, where America's maddest scientists have been given unlimited budgets and zero adult supervision. The smell hits you first. A mixture of cordite, chemistry experiments gone wrong, and what might be decomposing fish. That last one, you'll learn, is intentional. The man running this scientific circus is Stanley Lovell, a mild-mannered chemist from Boston who previously developed industrial adhesives and now develops ways to kill people creatively. He greets you while absent-mindedly juggling 3 devices that look like ordinary lumps of coal, but are actually bombs designed to destroy Nazi locomotives. The beauty, he explains, still juggling, is that they'll throw these into the engine themselves. Helpful of them, really. One of his assistants nervously suggests he stop juggling the explosives. Lovell seems genuinely surprised they're armed. The laboratory stretches through several buildings, each section more unhinged than the last. In the chemistry wing, they're developing Aunt Jemima, an explosive flour that can be baked into bread or muffins. Until detonated, it's completely edible. One scientist is literally making pancakes with plastic explosives to prove the point. Tastes terrible, he admits, but it won't kill you unless you add the detonator. This seems like an important distinction that shouldn't require demonstration. Yet here we are, watching someone eat explosive pancakes for science. The documents section produces possibly the war's strangest weapons. There's itching powder designed to be introduced into German uniform shipments. Imagine entire Wehrmacht units suddenly scratching uncontrollably during parade inspection. There's a substance called me that simulates the smell of explosive diarrhea, intended to be sprayed on German officers to humiliate them in public. A Princeton chemistry professor spent 3 months perfecting this formula. His mother thinks he's working on weapons to defend democracy. She's technically correct, though explaining how synthetic feces defeats fascism might be challenging. You witness the testing of the Beano grenade, designed to be thrown like a baseball, because apparently Americans can't throw standard grenades properly, but everyone knows how to pitch. The designer, a former minor league player, demonstrates by striking out a mannequin dressed as Hitler. There's also the Bushmaster, a helicopter-deployed mine that looks like animal droppings. Psychological warfare, the inventor explains. Nobody suspects poop. This is apparently a serious military assessment. Here's the detail that doesn't make it into official histories. The R&D team tested many of their creations on themselves. The scientist who developed the suicide pills, dubbed L pills for lethal, personally tested sublethal doses to ensure they worked quickly. He spent a week recovering from what he described as unpleasant but educational effects. The team developing truth serums experimented on each other during Friday afternoon parties that were part scientific research, part the worst cocktail hour ever. The transcripts from these sessions, recently declassified, reveal that PhDs say incredibly embarrassing things under the influence of sodium pentothal. The marine biology section deserves special mention for sheer audacity. They're attempting to train dolphins to attach mines to submarines, use bioluminescent foxfire as natural marking devices for beach landings, and, this is not a joke, develop a guided missile steered by a pigeon. The Pigeon Project, codenamed Project Pigeon, involves training the birds to peck at ship images, with their pecking controlling the missile's flight path. It works about as well as you'd expect a pigeon-guided missile to work, which is to say occasionally, but never when you need it to. The forgery department has moved beyond documents to creating entire German supply chains. They manufacture fake German equipment with built-in flaws, ammunition that jams after precisely 100 rounds, uniform buttons that fall off in rain, boot soles that separate after 50 miles of marching. The plan is to introduce these into German logistics through resistance networks. It's industrial sabotage with a sense of humor. One scientist spent weeks perfecting a German rifle lubricant that works perfectly until exposed to temperatures below freezing, at which point it turns to glue. He seems personally offended by the Eastern Front. Lovell's personal favorite is something called the Firefly, an incendiary device disguised as a Japanese bat. The plan, and remember, adults with advanced degrees develop this, is to release thousands of bats carrying tiny time-delayed bombs over Japanese cities. The bats will roost in attics and eaves, then boom. They actually test this on a mock Japanese village built in the Utah desert. It works too well. The bats escape and burn down most of the testing facility. The project is quietly shelved, though Lovell keeps a prototype Firefly on his desk as a conversation starter. By the time you leave the R&D section, you've seen enough creative mayhem to question humanity's collective sanity. These scientists have weaponized everything from flatulence to flour, created more ways to kill people than seems necessary, and done it all with the enthusiasm of children in a particularly violent candy store. Yet their inventions, however absurd, will save Allied lives and shorten the war. It's enough to make you wonder whether madness might be humanity's greatest survival trait. You're sitting in a briefing room that smells of stale coffee and fresh disaster, listening to the after-action report from Operation Banana, which went approximately as well as any mission named after fruit might be expected to go. The OSS's first major operations are providing what military historians politely call learning experiences, and what the agents involved call complete clusterfucks. Today's lesson: everything that can go wrong will go wrong, and then several things you didn't know could go wrong will also go wrong, simultaneously. The presenter, a major who looks like he's aged 10 years in the last 10 days, describes how their carefully planned infiltration of Morocco turned into accidental slapstick. Agent Fitzgerald was supposed to make contact with the French resistance at a specific cafe, he explains, pointing to a map. He went to the wrong cafe, the right address, but there are apparently 2 Café Royales on the same street. The resistance, meanwhile, assumed Fitzgerald had been captured and initiated their emergency protocols, which involved blowing up several things that didn't need exploding. Fitzgerald spent 3 days drinking espresso and wondering why his contacts never showed up. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, serves as the OSS's first major test, and the results are mixed in the way that a cocktail of gasoline and orange juice is mixed. Technically combined, but fundamentally wrong. Agents successfully infiltrate Casablanca. Yes, like the movie that's currently playing in theaters, which causes no end of confusion. They map German positions, identify collaborators, and establish communication networks. They also accidentally poison 3 resistance leaders with badly prepared invisible ink, blow their cover by using American slang, and lose an entire shipment of weapons when someone forgets that Arabic is read right to left and labels everything backwards. The Murphy's Law showcase continues with Operation Freshman, an attempt to sabotage German atomic research in Norway. The gliders carrying the sabotage team ice up and crash. The survivors are captured and executed. The backup team gets lost in a blizzard. The third attempt succeeds, but only after 2 agents spend a week hiding in a cabin surviving on reindeer moss and melted snow because someone forgot to pack enough rations. We've learned valuable lessons, the briefing officer insists. The primary lesson seems to be that Norway is cold and plans are allergic to reality. Here's what the official histories gloss over. Early OSS operations are basically expensive improvisational theatre where people actually die. Agents trained to operate in France are suddenly sent to Yugoslavia. Mediterranean specialists find themselves in Burma. One poor soul prepared for 18 months to infiltrate Berlin and ends up in Portuguese Angola investigating rumours of German submarine bases that don't exist. He spends 6 months filing reports about local fishing conditions because he doesn't want to admit the intelligence was wrong. The communications failures alone deserve their own tragic comedy. Agents transmit coded messages that headquarters can't decode because someone updated the cipher books, but forgot to tell the field operatives. One team in Italy sends increasingly frantic messages for 3 weeks before realizing their radio operator has been transmitting on the wrong frequency. They've been basically talking to themselves while headquarters assumes they're dead. Another group's code phrase for mission successful is accidentally similar to their phrase for under attack, leading to a rescue mission for agents who are actually enjoying wine in a liberated Italian village. You review the casualty reports, which read like a combination of battlefield statistics and Darwin Award nominations. Agent Thompson, killed testing experimental parachute. Agent Martinez, captured after asking for directions in English. Agent Chen, missing, presumed dead, last seen attempting to seduce German officer despite not speaking German. Agent Williams, injured by own explosive device, recovers, immediately injured by different explosive device. These are the people tasked with winning the shadow war. The equipment failures provide dark comedy, the secret ink that becomes visible in heat, unfortunate in the African desert. The suicide pills that look identical to the motion sickness medication, leading to several very nervous but very alive agents and one extremely seasick corpse. The encoded messages that make perfect sense in English but translate to obscenities in French, causing resistance fighters to question American seriousness. One agent's cover is blown when his forged German documents are too perfect. Real German documents have spelling errors because their typewriters are falling apart. Historians still argue whether these early disasters were inevitable growing pains or evidence of American incompetence. What's certain is that the OSS learns from each spectacular failure. Every dead agent generates new protocols. Every blown operation creates new training scenarios. It's evolution in fast forward, with natural selection operating at wartime speed. The survivors aren't necessarily the smartest or strongest. They're the ones who adapted fastest to the reality that their training was basically theoretical, and the war decidedly isn't. The briefing ends with what becomes the OSS's unofficial motto. Expect nothing to go as planned, plan for everything to go wrong, and always have a cover story for why you're where you shouldn't be doing what you can't explain. It lacks the elegance of traditional military mottos, but it has the advantage of being accurate. You're crammed into a transport plane somewhere over the Mediterranean. November 1942. watching North Africa appear through the cargo door like a tan smudge against endless blue. Operation Torch is about to begin, the Allied invasion that will test whether all those months of training in mansions and country clubs actually mean anything when the bullets start flying around you. OSS agents check weapons with the focused intensity of people who've suddenly realized this isn't a training exercise anymore. The agent next to you, a former Yale professor who 6 months ago was teaching romantic poetry, is now disguised as a Vichy French bureaucrat, complete with forged papers identifying him as an inspector of colonial wine exports. His mission: infiltrate Casablanca's government buildings and convince French officials not to resist the Allied landing. He's practicing his cover story in French, occasionally stopping to vomit from air sickness, and even the best training apparently can't prepare you for turbulence over the Atlas Mountains in a plane held together by rivets and prayer. The first wave of OSS operations in North Africa reads like a caper film directed by someone with a death wish. Agents smuggled into Morocco weeks earlier have been mapping defensive positions, bribing officials, and identifying which French officers might switch sides if properly motivated. Properly motivated turns out to mean everything from appealing to their patriotism to threatening to reveal their mistresses to their wives. One agent, posing as a black market dealer, has managed to purchase the complete defensive plans for Oran Harbour in exchange for 12 cases of real Scotch whisky and 24 cases of coloured water in Scotch bottles. The Germans, it seems, can't tell the difference after the first few drinks. Your plane lands at a dirt airstrip that supposedly doesn't exist, according to Vichy French records, because the OSS bribed the aviation inspector to lose the paperwork. This is the shadow war in action, not dramatic shootouts, but bureaucratic sabotage, where a misplaced form can be more devastating than a well-placed bomb. The Yale professor disappears into the pre-dawn darkness, heading for his rendezvous with French officials who don't yet know they're about to betray their German allies. In Casablanca, and yes, everyone makes the movie jokes, OSS operatives have spent weeks preparing the underground for D-Day, or rather J-Jour as the French resistance insists on calling it. They've hidden weapons in coffins, stockpiled ammunition in wine cellars, and turned the city's sewer system into an underground highway for moving agents. One operative, a former plumber from Detroit, has mapped every tunnel and pipe in the city. It's like home, he explains, except the rats speak French and the smell is actually an improvement over Detroit. Here's the detail historians still argue about. How much did the OSS actually accomplish versus how much was sheer luck? When French coastal batteries failed to fire on Allied ships, is it because OSS agents sabotaged the ammunition, or because the French gunners decided they'd rather surrender than die for Germany? When the planned French counterattack never materializes, is it due to brilliant intelligence work, or because the French commander spent the invasion night with his mistress, who may or may not have been an OSS agent? The truth is probably a mixture, but the OSS naturally claims credit for everything, including the favorable weather. The radio operators hidden throughout North Africa start their symphony of misdirection. False reports flood German headquarters, Allied forces landing where they aren't, French units surrendering that are actually fighting, supply convoys destroyed that never existed. One creative operator in Algiers convinces the Germans that an entire Allied division has landed east of the city, causing them to redirect forces to defend against phantoms. He maintains this fiction for 3 days, filing increasingly dramatic reports of a battle that's entirely in his imagination. As dawn breaks and the actual invasion begins, OSS agents emerge from their covers like heavily armed butterflies. The Yale professor successfully convinces 3 French generals to order their troops to stand down, though one only agrees after the agent implies he knows about certain financial irregularities that would interest both the Allies and the Germans. In the port, resistance fighters guided by OSS operatives seize key bridges and communications centers. Not everything goes smoothly. One team accidentally captures the wrong radio station and spends hours broadcasting jazz records before realizing their error. The crown jewel of OSS operations is the persuasion of Admiral Darlan, the Vichy French commander who could order all French forces to resist or surrender. The exact details remain classified even today, but it involves a combination of intercepted communications revealing German plans to occupy all of France, threats to his family's safety, and promises of power in the post-war world. Also, possibly, photographs that nobody wants to discuss, whatever the specifics. Darlan orders French forces to cooperate with the Allies, turning potential bloodbath into relatively peaceful occupation. By sunset on the first day, OSS agents have proven their worth. They've prevented sabotage of port facilities, identified German agents among the French administration, and established networks that will support operations throughout North Africa. They've also learned valuable lessons. Invisible ink doesn't work in desert heat. Camels are terrible for covert operations, and French colonial officials can be bribed with almost anything except American cigarettes, which they consider inferior to Gauloises. You're bouncing along in a requisitioned Fiat through the Italian countryside, autumn 1943, watching the medieval hill towns perched above you like stone wedding cakes about to topple. Italy has switched sides. Mussolini's government has collapsed, and the Germans are treating their former allies with all the warmth of a Russian winter. Into this chaos, the OSS is building its most ambitious intelligence network yet, turning Italy into a highway of spies running from Sicily to the Swiss border. Your driver is Maria, a former Roman socialite who traded cocktail parties for hand grenades when her husband was shot by the SS. She navigates the mountain roads with suicidal confidence, occasionally pausing to point out spots where she's personally blown up German convoys. That bridge lasted since Caesar, she mentions casually, gesturing at a gap in the road. Until last Tuesday. Her English is perfect, learned at Swiss finishing schools, now deployed to coordinate ammunition drops and assassination schedules. The Italian resistance is unlike anything the OSS encountered in France, where French underground cells were secretive and paranoid. Italian partisans operate with theatrical flair. They publish underground newspapers with restaurant reviews. They hold trials for captured fascists with full legal procedures. One group in Tuscany actually stages operas between sabotage missions, because apparently blowing up railroad tracks shouldn't interfere with cultural life. Your liaison officer, a former insurance salesman from Newark, seems permanently bewildered. They're planning an ambush for Thursday, he reports, but it might be delayed because that's when the soprano is available. OSS operations in Italy center on 3 objectives: supporting partisan groups, gathering intelligence on German positions, and rescuing Allied pilots shot down behind enemy lines. The first 2 are challenging but manageable. The third has evolved into an underground railroad that would make Harriet Tubman proud. Downed airmen are hidden in convents, smuggled in wine barrels, disguised as deaf-mute monks, and passed from family to family along routes marked by laundry hanging in specific patterns. One Beeson 17 crew spends 3 weeks being hidden by an entire village that collectively pretends not to notice 10 Americans who speak no Italian wandering around dressed as peasants. The safe houses deserve their own documentary. There's the monastery where the monks have built a printing press in the catacombs, producing fake German transit papers between morning prayers. The brothel in Naples where the madam, a formidable woman known only as Stella, hides Allied agents in the basement while entertaining German officers upstairs. The vineyard in Chianti, where the owner has converted his wine caves into a field hospital for wounded partisans. Claiming the screams are just enthusiastic grape crushing. Here's the absurd detail that captures Italian resistance perfectly. They're creating fake German units complete with paperwork, radio traffic, and occasional sightings by paid informants. Operation Sauerkraut involves an entire Phantom SS division that exists only in intercepted communications and forged supply requests. German headquarters spends weeks trying to locate this unit, diverting real resources to support imaginary troops. The OSS officer running this con is a former Hollywood scriptwriter who treats the whole thing like a screenplay. My Nazis, he explains proudly, are very demanding. They need winter uniforms, ammunition, and oddly specific amounts of sauerkraut. You witness the rescue of 12 Allied pilots from a German detention center, an operation that combines careful planning with pure Italian improvisation. The plan involves partisans dressed as priests conducting a fake religious procession past the prison. What actually happens is the partisans dress as priests, start the procession, then decide to just storm the prison when a guard makes inappropriate comments about the Virgin Mary statue they're carrying. The rescue succeeds, though the escape route has to be modified when they discover they've also liberated 8 Italian political prisoners, 3 British commandos, and 1 very confused German deserter who asked to join the resistance. The intelligence gathered through Italian networks proves invaluable. Maids in German headquarters memorize conversations while serving coffee. Railroad workers report troop movements. Children trained to count tank types play near German motor pools. One 12-year-old girl maintains such detailed records of German vehicle movements that Patton's intelligence staff requests she be given a commission. The request is denied, but she receives chocolate and a personal letter of thanks, which she frames next to a picture of the Pope. Communications between partisan groups involve methods that would seem ridiculous if they weren't so effective. Messages are hidden in pasta shipments, encoded in the arrangement of vegetables at market stalls, transmitted through church bells rung in specific patterns. One group communicates entirely through a traveling puppet show where the storylines contain coded intelligence. German officers actually attend these shows, laughing at puppet Mussolini while unknowingly watching their troop positions being broadcast to the Allies. Historians still argue whether the Italian resistance was more effective militarily or as morale builders. What's certain is that by 1944, the OSS and Italian partisans have created an intelligence network so comprehensive that Allied commanders know what most German officers had for breakfast. They've also proven that resistance movements don't require grim determination alone. Sometimes opera singing, wine drinking, passionately chaotic partisans are exactly what's needed to drive an occupying army insane. You're lying in a Norman hedgerow at 3 a.m, June 6th, 1944, trying not to think about how many things could go wrong in the next few hours. D-Day is about to begin, and you're part of the shadow army that's been preparing the ground for months. Around you in the darkness, OSS-trained resistance fighters wait for the signal that will transform them from farmers and shopkeepers back into soldiers. The BBC message comes through crackling radios hidden in barns across occupied France. The long sobs of autumn violins wound my heart with monotonous languor. It's Verlaine. It's pretentious. And it means the invasion starts tonight. For the past 6 months, OSS agents and their Jedburgh teams have been building an invisible army across France. Every demolished bridge, every derailed train, every German communication line that mysteriously fails. It's all been preparation for this moment. You've personally trained 3 resistance cells in explosives, taught housewives to cut telephone wires in patterns that look like weather damage, and shown teenagers how to sugar German fuel tanks. Now it's time to see if amateur saboteurs can slow down professional soldiers. The results exceed even Wild Bill Donovan's optimistic predictions. As Allied forces storm the beaches behind German lines, France explodes into orchestrated chaos. The Das Reich SS Panzer Division, ordered to race from southern France to Normandy, should make the journey in 3 days. Instead, it takes them 17 days of hell. Every bridge they need is destroyed. Every fuel depot is empty or contaminated. Railroad tracks are cut faster than they can be repaired. Snipers harass them constantly. Farmers by day, marksmen by night, trained by OSS operatives who taught them to shoot and vanish. In Brittany, resistance groups trained by Jedburgh teams attack German communications so effectively that entire units lose contact with headquarters. German commanders, unable to coordinate, make decisions based on outdated information while Allied intelligence knows their positions in real time. One OSS operator, a former telephone company employee from Ohio, has taught French resistance fighters to tap German phone lines so skillfully that they're intercepting orders before the intended recipients. It's like being a switchboard operator, he explains, except I occasionally cut the wrong wire on purpose. The human intelligence network reaches its crescendo. French railway workers report every German troop movement. Maids in German headquarters memorize map positions. Even French prostitutes, recruited by the OSS, extract information from lonely German soldiers and pass it along. One agent, operating a bicycle repair shop, has been marking German vehicles with invisible paint that shows up under ultraviolet light, allowing Allied pilots to identify high-value targets. His cover is perfect. Germans bring their vehicles to him for maintenance, never suspecting they're being tagged for destruction. Here's the weird historical detail. The OSS psychological operations reached surreal heights during the invasion. Agents spread rumors that German soldiers captured on D-Day will be sent to comfortable camps in America, while those who resist will be turned over to the Soviets. They distribute fake German newspapers announcing that Hitler has been assassinated and ordering all units to cease resistance. One creative team prints thousands of counterfeit leave passes, causing chaos as German soldiers abandon their posts believing they've been officially furloughed. You participate in Operation Sussex, where 2-man intelligence teams are dropped behind German lines to report on enemy movements during the invasion. Your partner is a French-American from Louisiana who speaks French with an accent so thick even Parisians struggle to understand him. Together, you hide in a church steeple with a radio, transmitting German positions while the priest below continues services, occasionally covering your broadcast by enthusiastically ringing the bells. The Germans search the church 3 times, but never think to climb the ladder to the bell tower, assuming no one could transmit through that noise. The resistance operations aren't without casualties. German reprisals are swift and brutal. Entire villages are destroyed for harboring Allied agents. Resistance fighters are tortured for information. You attend too many funerals in liberated towns, where teenagers who should be in school are buried as heroes. The OSS training prepared you for many things, but not for comforting a mother whose son died because you taught him to use explosives. The moral mathematics of warfare, trading lives for strategic advantage, becomes personal in ways the country club lessons never covered. Despite the costs, the Shadow Army's effectiveness is undeniable. German units arrive at the Normandy front exhausted, depleted, and demoralized from constant harassment. Critical reinforcements are delayed for days or weeks. Communications are so compromised that German commanders don't trust their own orders. By the time Paris is liberated in August, the German occupation has been hollowed out from within by thousands of small acts of sabotage, each one planned and supported by the OSS network. Historians still argue whether the French resistance was decisive or merely helpful to D-Day's success. What's certain is that the OSS transformed scattered resistance groups into a coordinated force multiplier that made German occupation untenable. Every bridge the Germans couldn't cross, every train that didn't arrive, every order that went astray, these shadows shaped the battlefield as surely as tanks and artillery. You're chest deep in the Burmese swamp, leeches conducting a blood drive on your legs, while rain turns the jungle canopy into nature's own waterboarding experiment. Welcome to the Pacific Theatre, where everything the OSS learned in Europe needs to be unlearned, relearned, and adapted to an environment that seems specifically designed to kill Americans. Your instructor, a Kachin tribesman who finds your suffering amusing, demonstrates how to move silently through vegetation that sounds like a drum kit when you touch it. Japanese hear everything, he explains. Even your breathing is too loud. You'd argue, but he's probably right. The OSS Detachment 101, operating in Burma, has discovered that European-style intelligence gathering doesn't translate well to jungle warfare. You can't blend into local populations when you're a 6-foot blonde Midwesterner in a country where everyone is 5'4" with black hair. Forged papers are useless when most locals don't have papers. Even basic tradecraft fails. Invisible ink becomes extremely visible when combined with 100% humidity, and radio equipment that worked fine in Italian mountains short circuits in monsoon conditions. So they adapt, and the adaptations are beautifully insane. OSS operatives learn to navigate by elephant trails and bird calls. They train with indigenous groups who've been fighting in these jungles for generations, Kachin rangers who can track a Japanese patrol by the way grass bends, Karen scouts who communicate through patterns woven into cloth. One operative, a former anthropology student, becomes so adept at jungle survival that he goes native entirely, leading his own tribal army and occasionally forgetting to report back to headquarters for weeks at a time. The operations here have a different flavor from Europe. Instead of blowing up bridges, they're building them, creating supply lines for Chinese forces through territory the Japanese consider impassable. Instead of recruiting urban resistance fighters, they're arming hill tribes who hate the Japanese for entirely their own reasons. One Detachment 101 officer finds himself mediating a complex dispute between two tribal groups about water buffalo theft, because apparently maintaining Allied unity requires addressing livestock grievances that predate the war by decades. The Pacific OSS develops its own unique technologies. There's the Sleeping Beauty, a submersible canoe designed for harbor infiltration that works exactly once before everyone realizes that approaching Japanese ships in a barely floating coffin is a terrible idea. More successful are the waterproof containers for airdropping supplies into swamps, though the first versions are too waterproof and sink immediately, creating what one operative calls very expensive artificial reefs. They eventually perfect a container that floats just long enough to be retrieved, assuming the crocodiles don't get there first. Here's the absurd historical detail. OSS operatives in the Pacific Theater are issued suicide pills that don't work in high humidity. Several captured agents attempt to use them, only to discover they've degraded into something that causes severe stomach cramps, but decidedly not death. The Japanese, confused by prisoners writhing in gastrointestinal distress while claiming they've taken poison, assume it's an elaborate ruse. The OSS quietly develops new pills tested specifically in tropical conditions, though the testing process raises ethical questions nobody wants to discuss. You're assigned to work with coast watchers, civilians who stayed behind on Japanese-occupied islands to report ship movements. These people are universally insane in the best possible way. There's the Australian planter who's been hiding on the same island for 2 years, subsisting on coconuts and spite, transmitting Japanese naval positions between malaria attacks. The missionary who convinced local tribes that radio operation is a form of prayer, ensuring devoted protection of his equipment. The Dutch colonial administrator who maintained his cover by actually continuing to administrate his district under Japanese occupation while secretly reporting everything to the Allies. Language presents unique challenges. European languages at least share alphabets and some common roots. But Japanese, Thai, Burmese. The OSS language school frantically trains operatives in Asian languages. But it's like teaching calculus to people who just learned arithmetic. One operative spends 6 months learning Japanese only to discover his instructor was teaching him a dialect so formal that using it immediately identifies him as foreign. Another learns Thai from a book written in the 1890s and speaks like a time-traveling royal courtier, which actually helps his cover story of being an eccentric academic. The jungle warfare training evolves into something that would terrify the Geneva Convention. Operatives learn to use insects as weapons, how to direct army ants toward enemy positions, which spiders to put in supply shipments, how to ensure mosquitoes carrying malaria find Japanese camps. There's an entire unit dedicated to biological warfare using only naturally occurring jungle hazards. We're not introducing anything new, the commanding officer insists. We're just encouraging nature to be more strategically minded. Historians still argue whether the Pacific Theater OSS operations were as effective as their European counterparts. The metrics are different. Fewer spectacular explosions, more quiet intelligence gathering. But by 1945, OSS-trained indigenous forces control large swaths of Burma. Coast watchers have made Japanese naval movements an open book. And American operatives have proven that adapting to local conditions beats imposing foreign methods, even if adaptation means accepting that leeches are just another form of taxation in the jungle economy. You're standing in the ruins of Berlin, May 1945, watching Soviet soldiers trade watches with American GIs while OSS officers frantically collect Nazi intelligence files before they disappear into Stalin's archives. The war in Europe is over. Japan is weeks from surrender. And the organization that started in a Manhattan mansion with Wild Bill's crazy dream is about to transform into something else entirely. Around you, the shadow warriors who spent years perfecting the art of destruction are already planning for a different kind of war, one that will be fought in the shadows for the next half-century. The transition begins immediately. OSS officers who spent the war hunting Nazis pivot to recruiting them. Operation Paperclip is in full swing. And suddenly, the same German scientists who built V-2 rockets to destroy London are being offered comfortable positions in American laboratories. You watch a former Jedburgh operator, who 6 months ago was blowing up German supply lines, now carefully interviewing Wehrmacht intelligence officers about Soviet capabilities. The moral flexibility required for this shift would break most people. But the OSS has spent 4 years training moral contortionists. In the Pacific, even as atomic bombs end the war, OSS operatives are already laying groundwork for what everyone sees coming. Teams infiltrate Chinese communist areas, ostensibly to coordinate against the Japanese, but really to assess Mao's strength. Others establish networks in what will become North Korea, Vietnam, and Indonesia. A prescient few even start learning Russian. The hot war is ending, but the cold one has already begun. And the skills developed fighting Nazis translate remarkably well to this new conflict. Back in Washington, bureaucratic warfare erupts over the OSS's future. Edgar Hoover wants it destroyed. Viewing Donovan as a rival who might expose the FBI's wartime failures, the military wants its intelligence capabilities absorbed into traditional structures. The State Department wants the whole thing shut down because spies make diplomacy awkward. President Truman, who never liked Wild Bill anyway, signs the order disbanding the OSS on September 20th, 1945. The organization that revolutionized American intelligence apparently has 2 weeks to cease existing. But you can't uninvent the atomic bomb, and you can't make America forget how to spy. OSS veterans scatter across government agencies like seeds waiting to sprout. Some join the Strategic Services Unit, ostensibly a military intelligence organization, but really the OSS wearing a fake mustache. Others infiltrate the State Department, military intelligence, even Hoover's FBI. They maintain their networks, keep their contacts warm, and wait. Because everyone knows this isn't over. It's just intermission. The transformation happens faster than anyone expects. By 1947, the National Security Act creates the Central Intelligence Agency. And surprise, surprise, it's staffed almost entirely by OSS veterans. Alan Dulles, who ran OSS operations in Switzerland, will eventually run the CIA. James Jesus Angleton, who learned counterintelligence in Italy, will become the CIA's legendary paranoid genius. William Colby, a Jedburgh who jumped into Norway, will direct the entire agency. The mansions and country clubs that train saboteurs now train a permanent intelligence establishment. Here's the historical irony historians still argue about. Did the OSS create the CIA? Or did the necessity of the CIA retroactively justify the OSS? The improvised wartime experiment has become the blueprint for American intelligence. Those absurd training programs, teaching Yale professors to crack safes, training socialites as assassins, established the template. The CIA's training facility at Camp Peary, the farm, is essentially the Congressional Country Club, with a bigger budget and legal authority. The legacy extends beyond organizational charts. The OSS proved that American intelligence could be as effective as any European service, just weirder. Where British intelligence operated like a gentleman's club and Soviet intelligence like a revolutionary vanguard, American intelligence became a strange hybrid, part corporate bureaucracy, part Wild West show. The conviction that technology could solve any problem, that American ingenuity could overcome traditional spycraft, that lawyers and professors could become warriors. All of this starts in those desperate days of 1941. You attend one last gathering of OSS veterans, supposedly a farewell dinner, but really a networking event for the next war. The forger who taught document fabrication discusses employment opportunities with State Department officials. The safecracker turned professor has already been recruited by what will become the NSA. Even the fortune teller from Donovan's basement has found work. Apparently, the atomic age still has room for mysticism with security clearance. As you leave the dinner, walking past monuments to the conventional war just won, you realize you've witnessed something unique in American history. A democracy built an effective intelligence service from nothing, used it to help win a global war, and then institutionalized it for the conflicts to come. Whether this is triumph or tragedy depends on your perspective and what decade you're examining. But there's no denying that the experimental spy school that began with Wild Bill's impossible dream has fundamentally changed how America operates in the world. The Shadow War continues, just with different enemies, evolved methods, and a much larger budget. The amateurs have become professionals. The experiments have become doctrine, and the desperate improvisations have become standard operating procedure. The secret school that built America's first spies has graduated its last class, but the curriculum it developed will be taught for generations. And so, as you drift off to sleep tonight, let the last images fade gently from your mind, those brave, unlikely spies returning to their ordinary lives, carrying secrets that would reshape the world. The typewriters have fallen silent in that Manhattan mansion. The parachutes have been folded and stored away, and the shadow warriors have melted back into peacetime America. Some became teachers again. Others returned to law offices or businesses, but they all carried with them the knowledge of what ordinary people can accomplish when history demands the extraordinary. The maps have been taken down from the walls, the code books burned, the radio frequencies gone quiet. Tonight, as you rest in the safety they help secure, remember that somewhere in the archives are their stories, tales of professors who learned to kill, of socialites who cracked enemy codes, of criminals who became heroes. The secret school has closed its doors, but its lessons echo through the decades, reminding us that when democracy faces its darkest hours, its greatest strength lies not in mighty armies or powerful weapons, but in the courage of citizens willing to step out of their comfortable lives and into the shadows. Sleep well, knowing that once upon a time, in a world torn by war, a wild idea in a Manhattan mansion grew into something that changed everything. The spies have come in from the cold now. Their war is over, and somewhere in the quiet corners of history, their ghosts are finally at rest. Sweet dreams, and remember, the most powerful secrets are often hidden in the most ordinary faces. Let their courage carry you gently into peaceful slumber. The story is finished. The last light extinguished in that old mansion, and all that remains are whispers of what was accomplished when America learned to fight in the shadows.